I am a pilgrim, a wanderer. And a pilgrim is a wanderer with a purpose. A pilgrimage can be to a place or for a thing. And my pilgrimage is for a thing. My pilgrimage is for peace. Now there's lots of facets of peace, and it covers all of them. Peace among nations, peace among groups, peace with our environment, but also peace among individuals, and the very, very important inner peace, which is what I talk about the most. Traditionally, a pilgrim is on foot. I started January 1st of 1953. I've been walking now for 26 years. It's what I'm doing with my retirement years. Back in the end, really, of 1964, I had finished counting 25,000 miles. And I thought that's enough, no more counting. So at that point, I did not stop walking, but I did stop counting. Also, I changed priorities. You see, I have had priorities in my life since I was a child. I established when I was in grammar school my rule of first things first, and began at that time to set priorities in my life. And I've done it, of course, throughout my lifetime. So when I started my pilgrimage, my priorities were walking first, then speaking, then answering mail. But as soon as I stopped counting, I switched priorities, and my priorities became speaking first, then answering mail, and then walking. And those are my priorities today. Now, a pilgrim has no visible means of support, and so I have no money, and I don't accept any money. And I belong to no organization. There is no organizational backing behind me, and all I own is what I wear and the few things I carry in my little pockets. I walk until given shelter, fast until given food. I don't even ask. It must be given. And it is. People are good. There's a spark of good in everybody. No matter how deeply it may be buried, it is always there. Now, one thing that I have always wanted to do was to contact people. And so I began to wear my short tunic with Peace Pilgrim on the front and 25,000 miles on foot for peace on the back. It makes my contacts for me in the kindest way, in the most effective way. You're in a much better position to talk to people when they approach you than when you approach them. And I notice that those who come are worthwhile people. They either are genuinely interested in peace or they have a good, lively curiosity. One more thing, a pilgrim usually has a message, and this one certainly does. It says in one sentence, this is the way of peace. Overcome evil with good, and falsehood with truth, and hatred with love. Now, there's nothing new about that except the practice of it. But I consider it the lesson for today, and so it becomes the message of my peace pilgrimage. Now let me answer the most common question that I am asked. How in the world did you ever get started on a thing like that? I came from a very quiet life. I was born on a small farm on the outskirts of a small town. I had a woods to play in and a creek to swim in and room to grow. And I would wish for all children a situation where they have room to grow. Because I look at plants growing up too crowded together, and I realize that they never attain maximum growth. And we humans are a little like that too. Now, I began to make some good choices when I was still quite young. For instance, my rule of first things first. And the golden rule influenced my life when I was quite young. I read it in history. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you, expressed in a lot of different ways. It was really pointing out that every culture had one. Well, it was different from anything I had ever read because it received an inner confirmation from me and affected my entire life. I carried it into high school with my little saying, if you want to make friends, you must be friendly. And that's an offshoot of the golden rule, a recognition that people react according to the influences brought to bear upon them. I still have it in my life today with my little saying, if you want to make peace, you must be peaceful. And that works too. I started to make other good choices. When I was still in what they would call junior high today, I was offered real cigarettes from a package, which I did not smoke, but my friends did. In high school, I was offered all kinds of alcohol, which I did not drink, but my friends did. Now, the test came after my student days. All my friends at that time used both alcohol and tobacco, and there was such a push toward conformity in those days, these days they call it peer pressure, that they actually looked down on me because I didn't. And gathered in someone's living room, I said to them, look, life is a series of choices. Nobody can stop you from making your choices, but I have a right to make my choices too. And I have chosen freedom. And then I went right on to choose freedom from other enslaving things. I chose freedom from negative thinking. Why, you can absolutely destroy yourself through negative thinking. Because every moment of your life you're creating through thought. You're creating your inner conditions, and you're helping to create the conditions around you. I just think about the best that could happen and all the good things I would like to see happen. Those are the things I would like to emphasize. And if someone were to do the meanest thing to me, why, I would just feel the deepest compassion for this out-of-harmony person who is capable of doing mean things. And I certainly wouldn't hurt myself by a wrong reaction of bitterness or anger. And then, about 41 years ago now, 15 years before the pilgrimage started, I chose freedom from unnecessary possessions and meaningless activities. I came out of my empty life of money and things and started to live to give instead of to get. Well, my life just blossomed out. 3 things happened. I attained the great blessing of good health. I haven't had an ache or a pain or a cold or a headache for 41 years. I knew my life work was going to be work for peace, and the whole peace picture. And long after I had finished the physical growing up, and I had finished the mental growing up, I had enough knowledge to get along, I could make my own decisions, and I had finished the emotional growing up. I could get along with people and with myself. I started the psychological growing up, which takes you from the self-centered life into the life that sees you in proper perspective as a part of the whole and works for the good of the whole. You see that every human being is of equal importance. Every one of them has a job to do. Every one of them has equal potential, but we're in very varied stages of growth because we choose as to whether we will even finish the mental and emotional growing up, and as to whether we will begin the psychological growth. And there are so many people who choose never to begin that. But it was doing the psychological growing up and finding inner peace that prepared me for the pilgrimage that I walk today. When I started out, my hair had turned to silver. I looked as today. And I remember when I told my friends I was about to walk across the country, they thought I had taken leave of my senses. But what I walk on is not the energy of youth. It's a better energy. It's an energy that never runs out. When you have found inner peace, you feel plugged into the source of universal energy. Right there, waiting for people to plug in. And that's what I walk on. Let me give you an example of this amazing energy from someone else's experience. Because sometimes under special circumstances, this endless energy becomes available for just a little while. I was walking out of a town and a truck driver stopped to talk with me. He said, I heard you say over television something about that endless energy, and I just wanted to tell you that I had it one time. Yes, he said, I was marooned in a town by a flood, and I got so bored that I finally offered to help, and I got interested in getting people out. Why, he said, I worked without eating, I worked without sleeping, and I wasn't tired. But he said, I don't have it anymore. I said, well, what are you working for now? He said, money. I said, that should be quite incidental. You have that endless energy only insofar as you are working for the good of the whole. As soon as you start working for your selfish little self, it's gone. And that's the secret of it. In this world, you are given as you give. And when I realized what human potential really was, what people really are capable of, I looked around me and I said, how sad that most people only scratch the surface of their real potential. No wonder they have problems. No wonder society has problems. And I started talking about human potential and society's potential. Because, of course, the situation in the world around us is always a reflection of the collective inner situation. And so I would like to draw for you a graph illustrating human potential. Now, first, I will draw the life stably governed by the self-centered nature, then the life which is a struggle between the self-centered nature and the nature centered in the good of the whole, which is the psychological growing up, and then the life which is stably governed by the nature which is centered in the good of the whole. So, I will begin by drawing a straight line representing the life governed by the self-centered nature. Now, there is struggle in that area of life because you see body, mind, and emotions are instruments. Now, they can be used by the self-centered nature or by the nature centered in the good of the whole. But the self-centered nature never fully controls body, mind, and emotions. In fact, it is itself controlled by the wishes for comfort and convenience on the part of the body, by the demands of the mind, and by the outbursts of the emotions. So here you have a struggle between body, mind, and emotions and the self-centered nature, which uses them to a certain extent without ever being fully able to control them. In this area of life, you can do the physical, mental, and emotional growing up. Not only that, you can get an occasional confirmation from the higher nature when you touch some truth from the outside, as I did on the Golden Rule when I was still in grammar school. You can also get an occasional direct perception from the higher nature, as I did when I was 16 and a senior in high school. At that time, I went around asking everyone who mentioned God in my presence, what is God? Because I was anxious to find out something about the nature of God. But I got no answer. I didn't give up because I knew intellectually that originally it must have meant something. So I pondered deeply upon it. I went to bed and slept over it, and in the morning from the inside, I had my answer. Now, I realize that your life is very much governed by your early trainings at this point in your life, but there are still some times when you can get either confirmations from the higher nature or direct perceptions from the higher nature. Now, if you're going to begin the psychological growing up, you come to the point where you feel completely willing, without any reservations, to leave that self-centered life, which I accent. And then you go into a direct struggle between the two natures with the two different viewpoints. So now there are hills and valleys in your life, lots of hills and valleys. This struggle can be more or less stormy. Mine was about medium, and some think of it as an ascending experience, with each hilltop becoming a little bit higher than the last hilltop. Let me express this struggle in the words of a college student. She pointed to this struggle I had drawn here, and she said, I know exactly what you mean by it because I'm in it. One time, all I think about is, I want a new dress. I want a new pair of shoes. And the next minute I'm thinking, what's the matter with me? A lot of people in this world have no shoes. Why should I be thinking about such superficial things? Once self-centered and once centered in the good of the whole is what that struggle is really all about. Then, if you keep on going, you come to the point where you rise high enough in consciousness to look at the entire universe through the eyes of the higher nature, which I accent. That's a wonderful experience. It's called the peak experience by some of the scientists. Some of the religious people call it the illumination experience. It's a feeling of complete and absolute oneness with all creation. Now, I knew I was one with all fellow human beings before I got there. But now I felt a kinship with the rest of creation, the creatures that walk the earth, the growing things of the earth, the air, the water, the earth itself. You would never be a polluter after that. You have a different attitude towards your environment. And most wonderful of all, a oneness with that which permeates all and binds all together and gives life to all. Well, you still slip in and out of this wonderful experience, and then you get on to the plateaus. Now, you are in harmony most of the time, and yet there are times when you still do slip out of harmony. And finally, you succeed in changing your life, or bringing your life into harmony, or finding inner peace, which I also accent. Now you have come through the inner growth pattern. You discover now that learning and growing does not cease. The struggle is over, but the learning and growing continues harmoniously without struggle. And it was at this point in my life that my pilgrimage began. I would not have been ready for it before. Now, coming through this inner growth pattern means not only bringing your life into harmony with the laws which govern this universe, which are the same for all of us, it also means finding and fitting into your special place in the life pattern which is unique for every human being. This is the self-centered nature. This does not know your job in the life pattern. This is the nature centered in the good of the whole. This does know your job in the life pattern. It just needs to be awakened. Now, the self-centered nature is partly conscious and partly subconscious. And into the subconscious part of the self-centered nature go all of your trainings from little child on. And it's usually a hodgepodge of things which will lead to harmony and things which will not lead to harmony, and even, in some cases, sets of opposites. And yet, these things govern your life, unless they are uprooted, which is a difficult thing to do, but of course it can be done. Now, the sets of opposites, which seem to confuse us the most, in this culture at least, are still the same two sets of opposites that confused the people of my generation. Although I think the training in this direction, at least in the direction of the first one, is not as severe as it was when I was young. On the one hand, I was trained to believe that I should be kind and loving and never hurt anybody. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we people of the world lived that way? But on the other hand, I was trained to believe that if so ordered, it is indeed honorable to maim and kill people in war. They used to give medals for it. Now, this confused most of the people of my time. It's confusing fewer people today. But it did not confuse me. I was very fortunate. I never believed there was any time, under any circumstances, when it might be right for me to hurt anybody. So I'm pointing out to you that occasionally these things just don't take. That one didn't take with me. The other one did. On the one hand, I was trained to believe that I should be kind, that I should be generous, that I should be unselfish, and of course, what a wonderful world if we lived that way. But on the other hand, I was trained to believe that if I wanted to be successful, I must get out there and grab more than my share of this world's goods. That one confused me up until 41 years ago, at which time I uprooted it. It can be done, but it's a difficult thing to do. Now, I would like to point out to you that in our larger culture, there are a few smaller cultures where these confusing trainings do not take place, at least the first one. No one has ever been harmed by a Hopi Indian. I have known people who lived among them. No one has ever been harmed by an Amish person. There is no violence in their streets. Now, why is this true? Because they learn from little child on that it would be unthinkable to harm a human being. And therefore, they never do it. But in the larger culture, the small child watches the hero shoot the villain on some film, training the small child to believe that shooting people is heroic. The hero just did it. Effective. It seemed to work. Acceptable. He was well thought of afterward. I'd like to see an altogether different hero image, where the hero does something significant to serve fellow human beings. But this will only happen when enough of us do enough of this inner growing to make it happen. Because, of course, the outer situation is always a reflection of the collective inner situation. Now, perhaps we can talk together for a little while. I would like to hear your comments, answer your questions, anything about the pilgrimage or about any part of the peace picture. Let's talk together now.
I'd like an opinion of yours, like concerning what a lot of people have thought of as like the self-centeredness of like culture and a new narcissism focus on the self. And, I mean, do you see that as really negative? You seem to be totally oriented towards you know, the whole society and putting down of the individual, so to speak. Do you feel that's really negative, or do you think that's positive?
I wasn't putting down the individual at all. In a sense, I was glorifying the individual. I said that every individual is of equal importance. You see, one of my problems was to realize this, because I was always quite forgiving toward the other fellow. But when I did something that wasn't the highest, I would say to myself, you ought to know better. I was very, very hard on myself. And one day, I remember I was just standing there and combing my hair at the mirror. And I looked at myself and I said, you vain thing. Why should you think you ought to know better when you forgive everyone else for not knowing better? You're just as, well, the same as everyone else. You must forgive yourself as easily as you forgive the others. And then take a further step. Use all that energy you've been using on condemning yourself, on improving yourself. And after that, I really started to get somewhere, because, you know, doing this psychological growing up and finding inner peace is really a do-it-yourself project. Nobody can do it for you, but you can do it for yourself. So I would say what you must do is to put yourself into proper perspective. No one is more important than you are. No one is less important than you are. You see, you're just as important as everyone else, and you too have a right to be here, and you too have a reason to be here. You have a job to do in the total scheme of things.
Do you see yourself as effective? I mean, you've been walking now for 25 years or so.
Yes, 26 years now. I would never ask to see results. You see, I know that in the wonderful total scheme of things in this orderly universe, all good effort bears good fruit, whether you see the results or not, because I realize that often the results are not manifest in your lifetime, but eventually they will become manifest. Now, I have seen results. I have seen a lot of letters from people indicating that they had been inspired to do something for peace in their own way. They do a wide variety of things. Some of them, for instance, write their congressman about some constructive suggestion, or they might join some peace group so they have some guidance in working for peace. However, they might get rid of some worry habit or anger habit or fear habit that is keeping their own life from coming into harmony. Or they might make peace with some friend or relation. A lady wrote and said, "Since talking with you, I have resolved an unpeaceful situation between myself and my sister-in-law." And a high school girl wrote and said, "Since talking with you, I have made peace with my girlfriend." And this is wonderful because, you see, really, peace begins with the individual. The more peace you have in your own life, the more you can reflect into your surroundings and ultimately into your world. And every time you succeed in bringing harmony into any inharmonious situation, right where you are, you make a contribution to the total peace picture. So, although I have never asked to see results, I have certainly seen results beyond my fondest dreams.
Or could you give a picture, a sense in words of what the experience is of that cosmic sense of unity that you talked about before? How would one experience that?
Now, you mean when we have reached this point?
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if when you talked about being at one with your fellow man, fellow persons, and then you talked about being at one with the cosmos,
the rest of the
universe, with
creation,
animals
yes,
and plants, etc.
Yes. Well, now that was in this experience. And I knew even before this experience that I was one with all fellow human beings. This graph, I might analyze. It isn't my analysis, but it's the analysis of the head of the psychology department at a large university. He pointed to the various phases and related them to some psychologists that had talked about them. And I can't actually talk much about this except to give you the names of the psychologists, because this is his analysis.
I'm not asking so much for that. If you could provide a personal view of what that experience is like for
Yes,
you.
of course. I will be glad to. But let me give you the psychologists in case they might be of some interest. Freud, Adler, Maslow's peak experience. Rogers must have talked about the plateaus. Jung, Erich Fromm. Now, let me tell you, well, he was pointing out that if you're studying just Freud, you're studying only back here, you see. And it may be valuable, but remember where it is. Now, let me talk about it from my own experience. In this experience, for instance, I gave you the essential part of it, the feeling of complete and absolute oneness with all creation. I gave you that, you see. Now, besides giving you that, I can tell you there is usually some phenomena connected with it. For instance, I felt lightness, as though I were not walking on the earth. You've heard of walking on air or walking on clouds. I knew timelessness and spacelessness. I can never tell you how long it took or how much ground I covered. I was on my feet. I was walking. And then there was another thing connected with it. You see, there is often a light experience, if it is at night, a burst of light sometimes. But this was in the daytime. There were no people there, and not even any animals. But every flower, every shrub, every tree seemed to, well, there was a light emanation around it. It seemed to wear a halo, and flecks of gold fell like slanted rain through the air. However, this is just the tinsel, the window dressing. This is not really important, which is why I often omit it. The important thing is the feeling of complete and absolute oneness with all creation. Now, at this point, actually, I'll tell you how my pilgrimage began. I had slipped out of harmony for the last time, as it turned out. And as I went to bed that night, I thought, it seems to me, if I could just remain in harmony, I could be of much greater usefulness. Because every time I slip out of harmony, it impairs my usefulness. And when I woke up in the morning, I was back again on the mountaintop with a wonderful inner knowing that I would never need to descend again into the valley. And with that wonderful feeling, I went out for my time apart, my inspirational time. And I was back with my friends in less than an hour. And while I was out, you might say a thought just struck my mind. I felt this strong inner motivation toward this next way of witnessing for peace. Now, there was a little more than that to it. I saw in my mind's eye myself walking along and wearing the garb of my mission. I just needed to duplicate it. I saw in my mind's eye a map of the United States with the large cities marked in, and it looked as though someone had taken a colored crayon and marked a route across from Los Angeles to New York City, coast to coast and border to border, which was my first pilgrimage route. Now, this was, of course, something which no one could dissuade me from doing. Everyone tried. Everyone I knew tried to dissuade me. They thought I would probably kill myself the first year walking across the country. But, you see, these higher receivings, either the thing you touch from the outside and get the confirmation on, or the direct perceptions, and this, of course, was a direct perception. These things get to a very deep level where there is no doubt. There is complete clarity and understanding. You can explain these things. You can discuss these things. Your own higher nature is actually a drop from the ocean of truth around you, and it has access to the ocean. From that source came all inspired writing in the first place, and somebody wrote it down. And you yourself can reach out directly into that source. Now, one more thing. I might mention, of course, that you keep on learning lessons after you have found inner peace. The first lesson I learned was the lesson of receiving. You see, I had been on the giving side for so many years, and now it was necessary for me to learn to receive as gracefully as I was able to give in order to give the other fellow the joy and the blessing of giving. But the way you feel after you have gotten over this hump, there is an unshakableness within which takes you through any situation you may need to face. There is a calmness and a serenity and an unhurriedness. And you know that although certainly you're not perfect, you don't know everything that is to be known, you can't do everything that is to be done, but you know that you will be able to do the thing that is right for you to do, that is your job in the total scheme of things. And therefore, you would have the faith and the courage to step out as I stepped out January 1st of 1953, against the advice of all my friends. I remember I was speaking at a college that first year, and the professor had prepared a questionnaire to be answered after I spoke. And the first question was, what in our society calls forth a peace pilgrim? Well, don't forget the Korean War was on, the McCarthy era was at its height. There was great fear at that time and therefore great apathy, because the safest thing to do is nothing. At any time, in any culture, where there is great apathy in the face of a crisis situation, a pilgrim is apt to step forth. And a pilgrim's job is to rouse people from their apathy and make them think. Oh, they're doing more thinking now, but I'm still trying to make them think about their own potential and living according to their highest potential. In fact, I would say the situation overall is better now, whereas people used to accept war as a necessary part of life. Now I'm on the popular side. Whereas at that time there was very little interest in the inner search, now there is an almost universal interest in the inner search, which to me is the most hopeful sign of all. Yes?
Times that you said you experienced descending from this higher place, can you say what precipitated that? What caused that to happen, or what events led to it, and then you went back?
You mean the descending into the valley again?
Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, of course, I can say in general that when I descended into the valley, it was because I was thinking again in self-centered terms, you see. Now, when I was back here at this point, you see, the valley was never deeper than my whole life had been before. So there, when I was on a hilltop, I said, life is wonderful. There are hilltops now. And when I was in the valley, I was used to that, you see. This isn't where I missed harmony the most. And of course, even after you've reached here, you do a little slipping in and out. But it was after I had gotten on the plateaus and then was in harmony a lot of time and then slipped out. That's when I missed it the most. And it was always when I started again to think of some self-centered wish, you see, that I descended into the valley.
Did it ever happen when maybe you were disappointed in how other people treated you or thought of you or anything like that? Was it related to others' behaviors or mostly your own, or you think it was your own self-centeredness when
Yes,
you're thinking about things you wanted?
I really can't say it was due to the behavior of others when I slipped out of harmony, but it was rather due to the fact that, again, for a little while, I had let the self-centered nature govern my life. You see, some people have difficulty relating to others, but I was always very forgiving toward others. I had rather to learn to have a more lenient attitude toward myself because there was a time when I really expected too much of myself. So I had to put myself into my proper place. Actually, I couldn't even point to people that have very much aided me along this path because, you see, I remember from the time I was 16 and a senior in high school, I took the inner way, and therefore for well, of course I call them spiritual things, I always looked to the inside rather than to the outside. Now, it isn't that I don't relate well to people, and it isn't that I do not love and appreciate people, because I certainly do. In fact, I see people as often more beautiful than they see themselves, because what I see when I look at people is not their self-centered nature. I see their higher nature, you see. That's what I see. People to me look beautiful. They look like shining lights. Whether they're acting that way or not, you see, they still are capable of acting that way. And of course, actually, what I see within the person is the reality within the person. Because really, you are this nature centered in the good of the whole. You're wearing the self-centered nature and wearing the body. And then the body wears the shirt. But these things also must be put into proper perspective. So what I see within people is really what is, well, unchangeable within people. Because nothing is unchangeable in this world except that wonderful spark within you and, of course, the source from which it comes. Everything else is changeable. And when you love people and see the good in them, you reach it. The world is like a mirror. If you smile at it, it smiles at you. Yes?
There you're describing your process of spiritual growth, but do you have a, do you prescribe a game plan for man in general, and is this possible to meet your basic needs when there's worldwide hunger and other such problems in the world?
The basic cause of all our difficulties is immaturity, is the fact that not enough of us have done enough of that growing. You see, as soon as enough of us do enough of that growing, we will be able to affect for the better our institutions. And then the bettered institutions will in turn, through better example, affect for the better those who are still immature. Now, our immaturity, of course, leads to problems. There are symptoms of our immaturity. Greed is one of the symptoms of our immaturity. And another symptom of our immaturity is fear. In our greed, we grab more than our share. In our fear, we build up armaments against one another. Now, there are also symptoms of symptoms, like war and starvation. And you know, you talk about people who are in need, and of course I'm concerned about them. But I realize that in the first place, if the greed did not exist, there would be plenty in the world to share. For instance, Howard Hughes amassed $2.5 billion. Can any human being use $2.5 billion? And did it make him happy? Those who write about him say he was the most miserable, fear-ridden creature one could well imagine. In fact, I've known quite a few millionaires. I've never known a happy one. Those who haven't enough money to feed their children, of course, are not happy. But neither are those who have too much. Because although they're far removed from the starving people, there is something within them which bothers them and keeps them from being happy. It's those who have enough, but not too much, who are the happy people. And then, you don't even need to be good at arithmetic to figure out that if the nations of the world were to stop manufacturing implements of mass destruction, they would have the wherewithal to provide the basis for a very good life for all the people who live in the world. So you see, when I talk about attaining more maturity, I'm really talking about the cause of all our difficulties. And I have just chosen, although I certainly appreciate those who work on the symptoms or the symptoms of the symptoms, it is my calling to work on the cause.
Wasn't it necessary to experience greed and fear and all these other negative attributes that you're talking about in order to work through them to meet this self-actualization?
I wouldn't say it's actually necessary. I would say that usually it is the case. Because there are some of these that I certainly have not experienced, at least not in any severe form. And yet I have been able, of course, to transcend these things. It is usually the way by which we come. You see, there's two ways in which we can learn and grow. Certainly one way is we can learn by our own mistakes. For instance, I learned by my own mistakes that money and things would never make me happy. But the other way is to simply be willing to do the harmonious thing without being pushed into it. For instance, I personally practice prevention. All things known to be bad for your health, I have quit long ago, before I got sick. Most people, of course, get very sick before they adopt sensible living habits, sensible eating, rest, and exercise, and so forth. But I was willing to do this without being pushed into it by some illness. So there's always two ways to learn. And I think really the easiest way to learn is to simply do the harmonious thing without being pushed into it. I started, and that was way back when I was beginning to go through my psychological growing up. I started by undertaking a very simple project. If I could think of something I was doing that I knew I shouldn't be doing, I quit. And I had the good sense to make a quick relinquishment, which is the easy way. You see, the tapering off is long and hard and usually never accomplished. And if I could think of something I wasn't doing that I knew I should be doing, I got busy on that. And it took the living quite a while to catch up with the believing, but it finally did. And when it did, a process began which has never ended. As I lived up to the highest light I had, higher and higher light came to me. And I would suggest this living all the good things you believe for any of the seekers, because that will take you into really the easiest way of learning and growing. Yes?
I've noticed, or I think I've noticed, that you have made a conspicuous attempt to divorce yourself, your background, who you are, from your message, from your pilgrim. So you give very little details about your own personal life.
I gave all the important ones.
Yeah, right. Okay. Do you feel that answering the personal, or revealing yourself in your personal sense rather than in your philosophical sense, detracts from your message? Do you think that sense of personal anonymity is useful for your message?
Well, I feel that people can only remember so many things, and I would much rather they remembered the important things instead of the very unimportant things. And so, of course, usually I have just a limited time to talk to them, and therefore I try to talk to them just about the important things. Now, I have to evaluate what I believe to be important, naturally. But I talk to them about the things that I feel are important and also may be helpful to someone else, may inspire someone else to want to do more growing. Yes? Yes?
I was going to ask you, you referred to a letter that a high school girl sent you.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what she wrote in the letter? You said that she said she resolved something between her and her friend, but can you go into some detail about what she wrote?
Well, I just remember that the gist of the letter was what I said, that since talking with me, she had made peace with one of her girlfriends, and she did say how much better she felt now that she had made peace with her girlfriend. I'll tell you, I believe possibly she was motivated toward it because I told a story of how when I was just beyond my student days, I had been given a job. One of my girlfriends wanted. I had been elected to an office in the community club that she wanted. And she thought she hated me, and she said all kinds of mean things about me. And I remember I hauled out the golden rule, and thought, now, what should I do in this situation, because it's a very unhealthy situation. I said only kind things about her. I thought of every possible kind thing that could truthfully be said about her. And I said it many times, and I tried to do her a favor. And it fell to my lot to do her a significant favor. And to make a long story short, when she was married a year later, I was maid of honor at her wedding. Now, I believe it was really that story that motivated this high school girl to make peace with her girlfriend. I can't recite the letter. I just remember the gist of it. Yes?
I had a statement to make in terms of the growth you were talking about, the psychological growth that is going on up to a peak experience.
Yes.
On a very simple level, when you go into a personnel office asking for a job, the personnel director can tell whether you're inwardly directed or outwardly directed. And that is whether you need to take care of your kids, whether you need to go and check on Uncle John or whatever, as opposed to asking you direct questions, set up a situation. What would you do in a situation like this? What would you do in a situation like that, for example? And I can understand how a person, that ego strength and self-confidence, if you will, comes out when you're talking to a person for a job or just one-to-one on a very simple level.
Yes, this is true. You see, I used to work with people who had problems, especially in this area of my life. And I remember, of course, that I had to spend quite a little time talking to them. Now, one of the things, however, that I talked to them about was their job in the total scheme of things. You see, aptitude tests may tell you what you will be good at doing, but they don't always tell you what you're really motivated to do. For instance, I test as being good at doing many things that are not my job to do, you see. So I would ask them, what do you really like to do? Because if it is your job, you will do it as easily and joyously as I walk my pilgrimage. And this worked out very well. I'll give you one example. This woman was in her early 40s and single and needed to earn her living. She hated her work to the extent that it made her sick. So obviously that was not the job for her. I asked her what she liked to do. And I talked to her, I remember, for 2 hours before we came up with 3 things she really liked to do. She liked to play the piano, but she wasn't good enough to earn her living at that. She liked to swim, but she wasn't good enough to be a swimming instructor. And she liked to work with flowers. I got her a job in the florist shop so she could earn her living working with flowers. But we used the other things too. Remember, there are a lot of things in a human life. It's not only a means of livelihood if you're the breadwinner. And in addition to this, although she didn't have this in her life at that time, most people are motivated toward the family pattern by this thing referred to as falling in love, and then they would be guided as a family unit. But besides that, there are other things. Sensible living habits, sensible eating, and rest and exercise. The swimming became her exercise. Now, something inspirational, or a number of inspirational things are important. Things that will lift you up. But all 3 of those things were highly inspirational to her. The piano playing became her path of service. She went to the retirement homes, played the old songs, got them to sing. She was good at that. Everybody needs a path of service. And out of those 3 things, such a beautiful life was built for her that when she married a year or so later, she stayed right in that life pattern.